All right, everyone, welcome back. We are moving on to our next thing. There it goes. Our next standard that we're going to be covering in U.S. History 2 for Utah Core. Today we're going to talk about industrial capitalists of the Gilded Age. And so the idea, the term Gilded Age, is comes from a famous author, Mark Twain, who kind of described this era as the Gilded Age. And something that's gilded is something that's metal, like a coin. So if you look at a penny, and a penny on the outside is like very pristine copper on the outside. It's polished, it's shiny, it looks pretty. But if you cut the penny in the middle, and I'm not suggesting this because this is a federal crime, but it's not the same material. It's corroded and it's not as quality of metal on the outside of it. And the idea of the Gilded Age is like on the outside, things on the surface look good in this time period. There's a lot of new businesses, a lot more opportunities for material wealth and things like that. But underneath the surface, there's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of terrible working conditions and so forth. And so that's why it gets termed the Gilded Age. But today we're going to focus mainly on the industrial capitalists that helped build America. A lot of people view it as the ones who helped build America. So, essential questions for today as number one, identify and explain what conditions allowed big business to rise to prominence in the United States in the late 19th century. And so the late 1800s, what are the conditions that allow them to do that? The second one is to identify and explain what were the differences between vertical and horizontal integration. Some terms that I will talk about a little bit later in the lecture. So the standard we are going to is the standard 1.4. So we skipped a couple. We will go back to them. But we felt as a department this would be a better order in teaching this material. So students will use historical evidence to compare how industrial capitalist leaders use entrepreneurship, free markets, and strategies to build their businesses. So some basic context with what's going on, in this time period here. Following the Civil War, the United States accelerates its industrialization. We talked about this already a little bit in class to begin with the year. And some of the factors that played a role in the industrialization is the abundance of natural resources in the West, which we've talked about already. A growing workforce because of immigration, which we'll talk about later more so. New innovations to technology, which we talked in an abundance of at the beginning of the year. And the last one, something that we'll focus on primarily today, is government policies. So some of those government policies were very much pro-business. And during the Civil War and after the Civil War, the radical Republicans that were in charge were really focused on nation building. Part of that nation building was to build the railroad systems up, including the Transcontinental Railroad. But others was to try to help boost American industry to compete with other industries around the world, and particularly England, who were the leading country in industrialization at this point in history. So they wanted to try to give an advantage to American industries by creating what we call protective tariffs. Now, a tariff is a tax on imports and exports. In this case, the protective tariffs are taxes on any goods that are being sold here in the United States so that it raises the prices of them and makes it harder for those industries to compete against American businesses who are producing something that is going to ultimately be cheaper because the tariffs that are being put on these foreign goods. And so this is something that still kind of happens today. Republican policies today are, sometimes pro-tariffs. It changes from generation to generation. But the United States companies, have these protective tariffs to try to help big businesses get more powerful, accumulate more capital, and invest to building more and more factories and creating more jobs and other things, right? So another policy that's going on in the United States government this time that's really important to note is laissez faire economics, the laissez faire idea. So laissez faire is a French term, and it means let it be. Essentially, what laissez faire policies mean in terms of business is that the government will pretty much allow businesses to do whatever that they want, that they feel is necessary for the best of the interests of the business. So the government doesn't regulate things like minimum wage or safety regulations or consumer protection and all those things. Pretty much anything goes at this era. So businesses could do whatever they needed to do to help turn a profit and control their costs and so forth. And sometimes that meant that they could. Well, there's pros and cons to this. All right, the pro is the businesses get ultimate flexibility. In doing so, they are able to turn a profit, reinvest that money into building more industry and other things. So there is an advantage to these laissez-faire policies. Laissez-faire policies. The downside of them, and something that we'll talk about more so, is in reaction to these policies, is that lack of regulation sometimes creates unsafe work conditions. If you're a company and you want to try to save money, well, then, and you have nobody pushing you, you may not want to create those guardrails that protect workers from falling into the machinery or something along those lines, because then that controls your cost more so, and you can turn a profit. The other things, like you sometimes you can see creation of unsafe products that are sold to the consumers. You can see price gouging, where you have the monopolies are created, where they have entire control over a market and they can charge whatever they want for a product that people need. So those are some downsides of it, and things we'll talk about a little more probably in the next class period. So the rise of big business is also made possible by the invention of the corporations. And corporations are nothing new. They've been around for 400 years at this point. And the corporations essentially is an organization that's owned by many people. And for people who want to be an owner in a corporation, they simply have to buy stock in a company, which is sold at a stock market. And when you buy stock into a company, you become a partial owner. Now, there's a big advantage to being a corporation as opposed to, like, saying, a small business, where if you're a small business and you need more money, you either have to make it or you have to take a loan from a bank. And if you aren't able to pay that loan back to the bank, then you are in trouble. You won't be able to maintain your business. Corporations are a little different because, despite that, the fact that it's similar to all businesses, they have fixed and operating costs. Fixed costs are basically you must pay them no matter what. That's the mortgage to use the land, it's your utilities to run your machinery and so forth. If you don't pay those, then you pretty much won't have a business. And then there's operating costs that you can adjust and fluctuate, like how many workers are you going to hire? What are you going to pay them? Things like that. You control the operating costs much more so. And in any business, whether it be a small business or a corporation, you are trying to control those operating costs. Now, sometimes if you want to try to expand your business, you need more money and such. Well, if you're a corporation, instead of going to a bank and trying to get it from a bank, you can simply sell more stock. And that steady income allows them to have capital that they can invest into their business, hire more workers, pay them, update machinery, whatever it is. So as a result, small businesses have a much harder or much tougher task of competing with a corporation, because corporations are, if they need more capital, they can simply sell more stock. And so that's something that gives a big advantage to corporations, and why you see more and more corporations come about during this time period, because it was much more advantageous to small business models. As these corporations come into power and come around such, they are going to be very successful in creating a business model that allows them to expand their operations and so forth. And over time, they start to adopt different strategies to become more powerful and to control their costs even more so. And one of the strategies is called vertical integration. And so vertical integration is a business model in which a company, one corporation, will try to control all of the means of production that is necessary for creating what the product they are selling. For example, If you are a meat delivery industry, and so this is the example you have right here in this, make this out of the way. In this little example here, if you are a meat industry, a conglomerate that is trying to control the cost of everything to be able to make it so you can make maximum amount of product with these little costs as possible, you want to be able to have ownership in all the industries and all of the services that are necessary in order to make that product. So you own the grazing land in which the cattle are grazing. You own the slaughterhouse. You own all the refrigerator railroad cars. You own all the cooled warehouses, meat packing plants, and delivery wagons. If you control all of these industries, you can control your operating costs much more so than, say, if you only own just the delivery wagons. Because then, if you just own these, then you have to basically pay the prices that each one of these industries are going to mark up on you. So because of that, vertical integration allows them to get lower costs, and they can lower their prices so much that it could drive their competitors out of business. If you are a consumer and you have two products of the same quality and one's cheaper than the other, then quite honestly, most people would pick the cheaper product. It is just the law of supply and demand. That's how free markets work. So this is something that's called predatory pricing. So once a person or a company is able to acquire all the means to be able to control their production and lower the prices so low that make it hard for your competitors to compete, you can basically drive them out of business because they can't keep up with your low prices. This is why Walmart today, while a lot of people like the low prices of Walmart, the cost of that is you have much less small businesses and mom and pop shops in local economies as a result. It's just the nature of the beast. That is, how free market capitalism sometimes works. Now, there's also another business strategy called horizontal integration. And this is something that is going to be done by, pretty much, I wouldn't say innovated, but used in large part by a capitalist named John D. Rockefeller, who pretty much cornered the market on oil and petroleum products in the late 1800s. But the idea is by using predatory pricing, and you can basically drive your competition into the ground. And in the sense that you drive them to the ground so much, not to put them out of business, but basically to put them on the brink of failure, and then have your lawyers and your executives show up to their offices and say, we would like to purchase and merge your company with ours. So that way they could get everything they wanted from that company, including all like the production, like the factories, all the stuff that they own at a minimum cost, because otherwise, basically we want to merge, we'll buy your company and we'll give you some money. Otherwise, they are going to go out of business. And so by taking control of that company, they kind of merge into the larger conglomerate that is their company. And, this helps effectively corner the market. So you just go out after all of your competitors, merge them with you, and then this effectively creates what we call monopoly. And monopolies are when you have 90% or more of the market. Monopolies, you don't find many in the country today, but I'll give you an example of all the professional sports organizations: NBA, MLB, NHL, NFL. All of those are monopolies because they're really the only companies that are providing that product, that service, that entertainment. And you don't see NFL competing with any other football leagues. And when they do, it's usually short-lived. Now, developments in the Gilded Age, and something we'll talk about a little more next time, is that you end up having these very powerful industrialists amass huge amounts of fortunes. And there becomes a very large gap between the wealthy and the working class. This graph here gives you an idea where, during the Gilded Age, here's the top 1% of the population owned roughly 50 to 53% of the entirety of wealth that was found in the United States, while the bottom 40% of the population only had about they had the other 40% or something like that, 41% or not. So there's like a complete flip, and so you have people who are extremely wealthy, a very small number of them, and then very many people who have very little money to make ends meet. So this is something that does happen, and something we'll talk about a little bit more in the next class. Now, these captains of industries, these robber barons, these men of industry, there is a viewpoint of that changes between whether they were what we call robber barons or captains of industry. And this is one thing that I enjoy about history is that there's never really a right answer. It's just, can you argue one over the other? And so that's something I'm going to ask you all to do a little bit with the assignment that we'll work on in class starting today. So one thing is robber barons. Robber baron is somebody who is viewed as a plutocrat, a very kind of like unethical American capitalist who uses their basically ruthless means to try to expand their wealth and greed and so forth. Partaking in things like government bribery, exploiting laborers and paying them very low wages and very unsafe conditions. The use of predatory pricing to drive out your business competition, things like that. And that's what's kind of known as a robber baron. The term, it comes from in Germany, where you had these barons who were like the lords of the land, such that would charge people extraordinary amounts of money to travel through their lands so that they could amass their wealth. So that's where the term comes from. Now, some people will also view that some of these industrial leaders of this era as captains of industry. And on the other side of that coin, somebody who's a business leader who amasses his personal fortune through their hard work and innovation and talent, so to say. And then they, by doing so, they are able to help improve the quality of life, in some way. They're providing a product that everyone needs and wants, and sometimes creating more jobs for people, and sometimes often with acts of philanthropy. And philanthropy is where you take your wealth and you put it towards a good cause, such as investing in education or something along those lines. So, example of a philanthropist around today would be Bill Gates, the creator of Microsoft, who's one of the wealthiest men in the world. He has the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that put a lot of money towards education, healthcare, in developing nations and so forth. So that's an example of a philanthropist, philanthropy work, so to say. Okay. All right. So in the assignment that I'm giving you, oops, let me go back. In the assignment I'm giving you, you will be kind of asked to research and read up on some of these here. It will be Andrew Carnegie, Cornelius Vanderbilt, John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, and Henry Ford. Thomas Edison will not be part of that group. But these five men, you're going to look up information about each one of them, and I've provided links for you in the assignments. You can use those, and you can use the ones outside of it. But I want you to research information about each one of these. So Cornelius Vanderbilt, what industry did he make his fortunes in? All right. And then 5 facts, not just simply he was born and so on. So I want you to what are some 5 facts that relate to his business's dealings? What are some things that he did in terms of creating, what events was he involved in or something along those lines. Okay. What are some business strategies they used? Did he use vertical integration, horizontal integration, a combination of both? Is there something else that they should know? You should make note too about how did he, what strategies he used to help amass his fortune. And then the last one would be, are they a robber baron or captive industry? And so going back to our definitions here, do you view them as more as a robber baron, someone who's ruthless and unethical and mistreated his workers or something along those lines? Or was he a captain of industry that, may have done some of these things, but overall helped contribute positively to the growth of the United States and contributed positively to society at the time as well? Okay. So this is, and I can't stress this enough, there is no right answer, but what you must do is take a side and then give me reasons for why. He's a captive industry because he gave money to these organizations that help do these things. So you need to make an argument one way or the other. No fence sitting. Okay, just think about on balance. Were they more robber baron or more captive industry? So that is your assignment to work on for today, and I'll give you some class period time to work on it as well next time too. And for those who are distance learners, this will not be due until the beginning of next week. So you'll have some time to work on it, okay? But make sure that you answer our essential questions once again. To identify and explain what conditions allowed for big business to rise to prominence in the late 18th century, and then identify and explain what are the differences between vertical and horizontal integration. So make sure you answer those questions and then get to working on the men of industry worksheet stuff, okay? Anyway, that's it from the Henry household. I will be back in class in the school on tomorrow, I guess, which will be Tuesday. And, for those of you who are distance learning, I'm going to try to reach out to you and see if we can set up some time on Friday so we can meet virtually. Other than that, hope everyone's doing well and happy and healthy, and I will see you later.